and the issue is the election in Nigeria in 2007 and the implications for the continent of Africa. And of course, Dr. Madu, you've given us some excellent information in reference to what is going on in Nigeria. Let's have you to continue that by perhaps pointing out some additional information in reference to some of the issues that will have to be done in reference to the success of this election.
And like from where I left off before, I talked about the need, for an agricultural revolution in order to help, the country to start an industrial revolution. Because where you don't have an agricultural base, it's difficult to sustain your industries. That's been the problem, not only with Nigeria, but most African countries. So that has to be emphasized. For example, a state in Nigeria called Kwara State, a few years ago, imported a whole lot of farmers from Zimbabwe, white farmers from Zimbabwe, to come to farm in the state. Here is a state that has a lot of money. What does it take to teach your own people to use, mechanized agriculture and all that, instead of importing workers again when you have
to work in agriculture?
Exactly.
When you might be able to justify it in some other areas.
Absolutely. 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 It didn't make sense. Okay, it didn't make sense economically and of national pride. It doesn't make sense. Okay, that's number two. Number three, healthcare. It has to be modernized. For example, a few weeks ago, the vice president, the outgoing vice president, Mr. Abubakar, sustained a knee injury. In his house, he had to be flown to London for knee surgery.
Oh, man.
Why not in Nigeria? He's been vice president for 8 years, so apparently he didn't think of the necessity of having a well-equipped hospital in his own country or in his own state.
And now he flies off to London.
He flies off to London to have a knee surgery. Every time members of the government get sick or sustain an injury, they fly overseas. Okay, for hospitalization. I personally think that whenever a president, goes overseas for medical treatment, I think it's a question of national security. Okay, a president sitting in a foreign hospital with foreign doctors and knives over him, it's a risk to national security. Okay, so I think this new president should, make it as a national priority to equip the hospitals the country already has to first class. It doesn't take anything to do. Much money has been stolen that could equip the hospitals in the country. Okay, this has not been done. And it's a disgrace that the governors and everybody else should be leaving the country to attend medical checkups and etc., etc. The average person in the country can't even buy a bottle of Tylenol comfortably. But then a governor can come here 12 times a year. And doesn't think about it. It's comfortable with that. Okay? So this must stop. The new administration must emphasize the need to modernize the healthcare as a matter of urgency. That's very important.
And Dr. Madu, would not many of the Western countries, I know from some of the individuals that you've presented to us for this particular show, many of these individuals come to the United States and they find that people in the United States are willing to cooperate with them through loan, lease kinds of situations and et cetera. Does that seem to be a viable method whereby Nigeria might be able to move forward in a real sense, especially in the areas of medicine, education, agriculture, and et cetera?
Absolutely, absolutely. You have so many willing partners here, but the problem is with the administrators in Nigeria. You see, you have a whole lot of NGOs and governments here who are willing to partner and work with various states in the country to develop their healthcare. For example, our own governor here in Tennessee is willing to travel to Nigeria and some African states to form partnership with the state. So also is other governments in this country. So it's not a question of finding partners in Europe or in the United States, but it's a question of willing partners there who could do their own part without compromising the integrity of the whole process, i.e. corruption, which is very important. Now, the fourth modernization that I want to emphasize is tourism. The country has some of the most beautiful scenery in the world, but yet the governments are not emphasizing the need, to develop the tourist infrastructure. For example, you have a place called Imo State, very beautiful scenery, but the government in that state is not encouraging people to go there. A whole lot of the slave you know, houses, you know, are in Nigeria. In Badagry, Opobo, Eket, Brass.
Which would be a very, very attractive kind of thing to a large number of individuals from the United States and other Western countries to go back there.
Absolutely, absolutely, and put money into those states. The governments are not encouraging that. For example, we hear about the Elmina Castle in Ghana and the Christianborg Castle in Ghana. A whole thousands of tourists flock to Ghana every year to visit this. These things are available in Nigeria, in southern Nigeria, but the governments are not emphasizing tourism. A predominance of the countries in Europe, 40 or 50% of their economy depends on tourism. You see, because they encourage tourism. A small country like Bahamas, people go to Bahamas every time for tourism because they develop the infrastructure for tourism. So the government should, as a matter of urgency, develop the tourist infrastructure. The country can't depend on oil forever. So the economy has to be diversified. And tourism is an important, segment in this process of diversification.
Dr. LMadu, but what with the very structure of the government, federalism with states and the national government, would the national government, some of the state governments be somewhat jealous if the national government start talking about tourism, for example, and pinpoint their particular states? I mean, how would these states react to that? Would they be willing to be cooperative with the national government dealing with all these areas? Well,
I think the initiative has to come with the state governments, insofar as tourism is concerned. Just like in this country, the state of Tennessee promotes its own tourist agenda, regardless of the federal government. The federal government has its own tourist agenda. If you want to visit the Washington Monument and all that in Washington, but if you come into Tennessee, exactly, you have Opry Land and all this. This is a state business. So the same applies in Nigeria. The states have to, encourage, the need for tourists to come. That means building the infrastructure needed, to encourage tourists, hotels, security, et cetera, et cetera.
And so all of these things, and so Dr. LMadu, I think we have about 3 minutes before we end the show for today, but let's give you an opportunity to sort of summarize and perhaps break some new ground in reference to some of the things that you would like to see as a result or the implications of this particular election.
Well, I think insofar as it's a historic elections, I think the new president, what I want to see is for him to build on what has already been done, regardless of how imperfect, the present system is. But it can be perfected. The United States has gone through over 200 years of,
perfecting
the government, adjusting and readjusting. So I think we are still in the learning process. Most of our people are impatient anyway, but you don't blame them. But at the same time, I think this is an opportune time for Nigerians to build on this democracy. In 4 years, I think we'll have a better election. In 8 years, I think we'll have a better election. And I'm optimistic, despite, being cautiously pessimistic at the same time. But I think Yaradua, given his background as somebody who is austere and not corrupt like the rest, so I think we should see a better, compassionate government.
Dr. LMadu, I'm reminded what Dr. Adigier said in one of the visits that he made with us, and talking about how important democracy is in Nigeria. And he said something to the effect that democracy is the ship in Nigeria and everything else is the sea, which is to say that the only way that Nigeria can really go from this particular point is toward democracy. It really cannot go back. And
absolutely.
So in a real sense, you're saying that this election has kept a large number of folks in the ship, you see, rather than in the sea.
Absolutely.
Very good.
Absolutely. I think so. And that's why I'm optimistic of the future. Most of those who oppose the current president and still opposing him are now trying to backpedal, and join the system, and try and help to perfect it than tearing it down.
Very good.
Always easy to destroy than build, so it's difficult to build, but we're in the process of building which needs the patience, you know, of everybody.
Very good. And of course, Dr. LMadu, let me thank you for bringing that excellent information about the elections in Nigeria and additional information and about the implications that this has for the continent of Africa. Because as we've said, you've given us so much excellent information prior to this time, and I know that it has gone far beyond this particular station, and so we expect this information to do the same thing. And of course, let me encourage our audience to tune in again next week for another informative edition of Comments. Thank you and good morning.